It's 1970 and the streets of America don't feel safe anymore. Not because of crime, not because of chaos, but because of something buried under the hoods of ordinary-looking cars. Something that wakes up with a deep, thunderous rumble that shakes chrome mirrors and rattles storefront windows. A 454 cubic inch monster, and in the center of it all sits one name that would quietly become legendary: LS5. Most people today hear Chevy 454 and immediately think of the infamous LS6, 450 horsepower, drag strip terror, pure insanity. But what they don't realize is that before the LS6 broke the rules, the LS5 made the streets tremble first. And in many ways, it was even more dangerous. Because this wasn't just a race engine, this was a factory-built weapon disguised as a luxury muscle car option. But what almost nobody talks about is how close the LS5 came to being just another big block footnote in history, until Chevrolet pushed it too far, and everything changed. Back in the late 1960s, the muscle car wars were reaching a breaking point. Ford had its 428 Cobra Jet, Chrysler had its 426 HEMI, an engine so aggressive it felt like it belonged in aviation, not automobiles. And Chevrolet? They needed something that didn't just compete. They needed dominance. The automotive landscape was shifting beneath everyone's feet. Dealerships were becoming battlegrounds. Every Saturday, young men walked in comparing spec sheets like military intelligence, cubic inches, compression ratios, rear axle gearing. These weren't just numbers anymore. They were badges of honor. Street corners turned into proving grounds. Traffic lights became starting lines. And reputation? That was everything. Chevrolet had been playing it safe with the 396. It was a strong engine, sure. Reliable. Respectable even. But respectable doesn't win wars. And by 1969, the muscle car war had reached its most brutal phase. So engineers at Chevrolet took a simple idea and made it terrifying. If 396 cubic inches was good and 427 was better, then 454 had to be unstoppable. The LS5 was born from that thinking. On paper, it looked almost civilized for a big block. A 454 cubic inch V8, 4 bolt main caps, hydraulic camshaft, cast iron block and heads. Nothing exotic. Nothing exotic at all. But under the surface, everything was oversized, overbuilt, and engineered with one purpose: torque. Bore measured at 425 inches. Stroke stretched to 400 inches. That long stroke meant one thing: instant, brutal, low-end power. The kind of torque that didn't build, it arrived. The engineers knew what they were doing. This wasn't about screaming to 7,000 RPM like some small block Italian exotic. This was about creating a wave of force so massive that it overwhelmed everything in its path. Low RPM dominance, street supremacy. Compression ratio sat around 10-25-1. High enough to demand premium fuel. Low enough to survive street driving without detonating itself apart on a hot summer day. The intake manifold was a simple aluminum piece, nothing fancy, but the flow characteristics were carefully calculated. The Rochester Quadra Jet carburetor sitting on top looked modest, almost unassuming, but it was feeding a beast that could inhale air like a hurricane. Factory rating? 360 horsepower at 4,400 RPM. But that number is misleading, because horsepower is only part of the story. Torque was the real headline. 500 lb-ft at just 3,200 RPM. That meant when you touched the throttle, the car didn't accelerate. It lunged. Think about that for a moment. 500 lb-ft of torque at 3,200 RPM. That's barely off idle. That's the kind of force that twists frames. That chirps tires in third gear. That makes passengers grab the dashboard in genuine fear. But at first, nobody fully understood what Chevrolet had created. It was just another big block option in the 1970 Chevelle SS454 lineup. Comfortable, heavy, slightly refined, a muscle car you could technically drive to work. The interior had bucket seats. Air conditioning was optional. Power steering helped tame the weight. You could order it in colors like cranberry red or forest green, colors your mother would approve of. But that's where the illusion begins. Because underneath that calm exterior was an engine waiting for the right conditions to become something else entirely. Something violent, something unstoppable. And Chevrolet had just enough confidence in it to put it in production. Only problem, real-world testing hadn't finished telling the truth yet, and the truth was starting to get loud. Early test drivers began reporting something unusual. Not failures, not defects, but behavior. One GM engineer reportedly said, It doesn't feel like a car anymore when it hits mid-throttle. It feels like it's pulling the earth behind it. Another tester described the sensation differently. You know that feeling when an airplane starts its takeoff roll? That push into your seat? It's like that, except it doesn't stop. On the street, the LS5-equipped Chevelle SS could hit 0-60 in about 5.4 seconds. Quarter mile? Low 13s at around 105 mph. On street tires, no modifications. For 1970, that wasn't just fast. That was humiliating for most competitors. Magazine editors started taking notice. Car and Driver ran their tests. Hot Rod magazine put it through the paces. Motor Trend compared it against everything Detroit was building. And the results kept coming back the same. Devastating. But then came the comparisons. Against Ford's 428 Cobra Jet, the LS5 had more torque everywhere. Against Mopar's 440 Magnum, it felt smoother yet stronger in real-world driving. Even the legendary HEMI had a harder time off the line unless it was perfectly tuned. The Pontiac GTO with its 455? Close, but not quite there. The Buick GSX Stage 1? Formidable. But the LS5 had an answer for everything it threw down. Street racers started figuring out the formula. The LS5 didn't need much to wake up completely. A set of headers, a free-flowing exhaust, maybe a slightly more aggressive carburetor tune. Suddenly you weren't just fast, you were untouchable. But there was a catch. Heat. And weight. The Chevelle SS tipped the scales at nearly 4,200 pounds. And all that torque, all that iron, all that rotating mass created one serious problem. The LS5 was constantly fighting itself. Oil temperatures climbed fast under hard driving. The stock cooling system was barely adequate. The radiator worked overtime, just keeping coolant temperatures in check during normal cruising. Push it hard, especially on a July afternoon in Phoenix or Atlanta, and things got serious quickly. And under sustained load, especially in hot climates, something unsettling began to happen. Oil pressure would dip, then recover, then dip again. A GM test driver famously radioed in after a high-speed run. Feels like the bottom end is starving when I hold it wide open. Like it's gasping for oil. That line made its way back to engineering. And it triggered quiet panic. Because they knew what that meant. Bearings and crankshaft stress. Inside the LS5, the rotating assembly was strong, but not invincible. The forged steel crankshaft was built to handle torque, but sustained high RPM loads were another story. Rod bearings, while durable, were still dependent on consistent oil delivery. The oil pump was a standard high-volume design, adequate for most situations. But when RPMs climbed and stayed there, when oil temperatures spiked above 250 degrees, when the entire bottom end was spinning at maximum fury, variables started stacking up. And at high speeds, oil aeration became a hidden enemy. Foaming oil meant inconsistent lubrication. Inconsistent lubrication meant heat. Heat meant wear, and wear meant failure. One teardown after a brutal dyno session revealed something engineers didn't expect to see so early in testing. The bearings looked like charcoal, one technician reportedly said. Not worn, burned, like they had been torched from the inside. That wasn't supposed to happen in a stock engine, not this quickly. So Chevrolet made subtle adjustments. Oil passages were refined. Cooling capacity was improved. Tolerances were tightened slightly. An upgraded oil pan design made its way into later production runs. Windage trays were considered but not implemented across the board. Small changes, invisible to anyone outside the engineering department, but critical for longevity. But the LS5 still carried a secret. It was operating at the edge of what a factory street engine could safely handle. And if you pushed it past that edge, it stopped being a street engine entirely. It became something else. Then came the turning point. Chevrolet engineers began experimenting with higher output variants of the 454 platform. The LS6 was the obvious next step. Bigger cam, higher compression, improved intake. Rated at 450 horsepower and over 500 lb-ft of torque. Solid lifter valve train. Aluminum intake. Higher flow exhaust manifolds. The LS6 was everything the LS5 wanted to be, but couldn't quite reach while remaining civilized. But the LS5 was the foundation, the baseline, the engine that proved the platform could survive. And on the streets, something unexpected happened. People stopped buying it for comfort. They started buying it for fear. In 1970, Chevelle SS 454 LS5 could bury most sports cars of its era without breaking a sweat. And when properly tuned, Some owners reported quarter-mile times dipping into the high 12-second range, numbers that embarrassed European performance cars costing twice as much. Corvettes with small blocks suddenly felt inadequate. Camaros with 396s looked like kid brothers. Even the mighty Corvette 427 had to respect what the LS5 Chevelle could do in a straight line. One drag racer from Detroit said, "It's not a race. It's a resignation." You just watch the other car disappear. Stories started spreading. A Chevelle in Cleveland that had never lost a street race. Another in Los Angeles that took down a Ferrari at a stoplight. A third in Miami that made a Shelby Mustang look like it was standing still. Whether all these stories were true didn't matter. The legend was growing. But the real legend wasn't built in straight lines. It was built in reputation. Because insurance companies noticed. And police departments noticed. And suddenly, anything with a 454 badge started attracting attention it never wanted. Premiums skyrocketed. Some young drivers saw their insurance costs triple overnight. Others couldn't get coverage at all. The same power that made the LS5 intoxicating on the street made it toxic on paper. Street racing crackdowns intensified. And manufacturers began to feel pressure from a government that was starting to see these machines as liabilities, not achievements. Federal regulators started asking questions. Safety advocates raised concerns. The party that had been roaring since 1964 was starting to wind down, and that's when the golden age started to crack. By the early 1970s, the world was changing fast. Emissions regulations tightened. Fuel standards shifted. Compression ratios began dropping across the industry. The Clean Air Act wasn't just a suggestion anymore. It had teeth, and those teeth were aimed directly at engines like the LS5. And the LS5, once a symbol of raw American power, started getting strangled by compliance requirements. Power ratings changed from gross to net. That same LS5 that once proudly represented 360 horsepower suddenly looked weaker on paper. But in reality, it was still a monster, just a quieter one. Because torque didn't care about paperwork. The engine itself hadn't changed much. Same displacement, same basic architecture. But the way it was measured, the way it was marketed, the way it was perceived, all of that shifted beneath regulatory pressure. But even torque couldn't fight time. By 1971 and 1972, insurance penalties and fuel concerns began killing demand for big block street cars. The LS5 continued production, but its aura was fading. The streets were no longer ruled by displacement alone. The 1973 oil crisis delivered the final blow. Suddenly, fuel economy mattered more than quarter-mile times. Suddenly, practicality trumped performance. The muscle car era didn't end with a bang. It ended with a whimper, strangled by economics and politics. Technology, economy, and regulation were catching up. And the LS5 was running out of road. Still, its legacy was already sealed. The LS5 didn't just move cars, it reshaped expectations. It proved that a factory engine could deliver race-level torque without needing exotic parts. It showed that displacement, when engineered correctly, could still dominate the real world. And it laid the groundwork for everything that came after: the LS6, the LS7, and eventually the modern LS-based performance revolution that still defines Chevrolet performance engines today. Every modern LS engine, from the LS1 that appeared in the 1997 Corvette to the supercharged monsters in today's ZL1 Camaros, carries DNA from that original big block philosophy. Maximum torque, reliable power, engineering over exotics. Years later, collectors would hunt down original LS5 Chevelle, restoring them to factory spec or pushing them even further. Auction prices climbed. Numbers matching cars became treasures. And enthusiasts who remembered what it felt like to experience 500 lb-ft of torque in 1970 started sharing their stories with a new generation. And every time that big block fired up, that deep, heavy idol would come back like a memory from another era. That distinctive lope, the vibration through the steering wheel, the smell of high-octane fuel and hot oil, it all came rushing back. One mechanic summed it up perfectly. You don't drive an LS5, you hold on to it. So what made the Chevy 454 LS5 a street monster wasn't just horsepower. It wasn't just torque. It was the way it delivered both without hesitation, without drama, and without apology. A 425-inch bore, a 4-inch stroke, 500 lb-ft of torque at barely above idle. An engine so simple on the surface, yet so overwhelming in reality that it redefined what factory performance meant. It was the way it made ordinary street cars feel inadequate, the way it turned grocery getters into predators, the way it proved that American engineering could build something truly intimidating without needing overhead cams or exotic metallurgy. And even today, decades later, people still talk about it not as just an engine, but as a warning. Because once Chevrolet proved what 454 cubic inches could really do, there was no going back. The boundary had been pushed, the line had been crossed, and every manufacturer knew that the game had changed forever. If you enjoyed this story, tell me what you want next. Another forgotten muscle car, a legendary rivalry, or a deep dive into the engines that shaped modern performance history. And make sure to subscribe, because the next story might be even louder than this one.